Thank you very much. You may be seated. I believe we were going to begin with the cross-examination of this witness. Mr. Kern-Fuller, if you're ready, you may proceed.
Good morning, Ms. McAbee.
Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Kern-Fuller. I represent Mr. Preston in this matter. I want to start with discussing with you the topic of conversation that Ms. Farron finished up with you about. Explain to me, if you would, your thinking behind the debate and calling the question on November 18th of 2008.
As I said at the time, the political atmosphere was so completely toxic, and the council and the community was, to some extent, were divided into two warring camps. Once the settlement agreement was put before council and debate was begun, and the council members had spoken, it became obvious to anyone that no amount of debate was going to change anyone's mind. And this was an opportunity for us to put this whole chapter behind us and end it.
And coming up to the severance vote on November the 18th of 2008, what generally was the vote on council on matters of political importance?
It had been 5-2.
And those 5 members were whom?
Myself, Larry Greer, Ron Wilson, Michael Thompson, and Gracie Floyd.
And who were the 2 members that consistently voted the other way?
Bob Waldrop and Cindy Wilson.
And you were a member of the Personnel Committee on this matter to investigate a meeting with Mr. Bright and determine a resolution to it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the process of the Personnel Committee, you had discussions at Personnel Committee meetings that were noticed to the public, right?
That's correct.
And do you recall how many Personnel Committee meetings you had that were noticed to the public?
2.
And did Ms. Wilson and Mr. Waldrop come to either of those meetings?
Yes, they came to the first one.
And did they voice an opinion about the matter of the severance under consideration?
They didn't seem to think it should be pursued. They didn't seem to think that there were any claims to be made, and that they wanted to delay and postpone as long as possible to get it past January 1st of the following year.
Did they ever express why they wanted it to go past January 1st of 2009?
They wanted the new members of council, the 3 incoming members of council, to join them and do whatever they plan to do regarding Mr. Preston, which I'm assuming would be suspend him, as they stated in their letter.
And I'm going to show you a document that's been previously admitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 2. Were you present at an audit committee meeting on August the 5th of 2008?
Yes, I was.
And at that audit committee meeting, was there a proposal made by Mr. Waldrop?
Yes, there was.
What was that proposal?
That the administrator, Mr. Preston, and our assistant administrator in charge of finance, Ms. Gina Humphreys, be suspended from duties and have no contact with anyone in the county. And while forensic audit was conducted, or audit was conducted to determine, or to search for, as I'm assuming, grounds for their termination.
And with regard to that audit, I believe Ms. Parham showed you notes of the conversation that you had with Mr. Bryce, as Plaintiff's Exhibit 21. Leave those there for a second, because someone else might ask you another question about those. You voted for that audit, didn't you, sir?
Yes.
And that vote on that audit was taken when?
I don't remember. It would have been after the June primary, but I believe it was taken prior to this August meeting.
So sometime between June of 2008 and August of 2008, you voted for an audit of Mr. Preston's administration.
Yes,
And that was after all this travel that Ms. Carroll went over with you from 2006 and 2007 and early 2008, wasn't it?
yes,
And isn't it true that you voted for that despite the fact that Anderson County has had over 10 years of clean, unqualified audits?
that's correct.
Now, you spoke with Mr. Bright on the 14th of October of 2008, is that correct?
It was in that time frame. I'm assuming that was the date, but it was in that time frame. I don't remember the exact date.
And during that conversation, and I'm showing you what is Plaintiff's Exhibit 21, it's also Defendant's Exhibit 24, but Mr. Bright wrote down that with regard to Cindy Wilson, it's all related to Beaver Dam sewer line. This is payback for her. Did you
Yeah.
recall saying that to him?
Yes, I did.
What was Ms. Wilson's problem with Mr. Preston about the Beaver Dam sewer line?
She didn't want the Beaver Dam sewer line built. She had opposed it from the time before she was on council. I first met her before she was on council, and when I was on the County Economic Development Board, and she was doing everything she could to stop the construction of Beaver Dam sewer line.
And isn't it true that she launched her political career on Anderson County Council as a result of this fight of the Beaver Dam sewer line?
At that meeting we had with her regarding Beaver Dam, trying to convince her of the benefits of it, I became rather exasperated with her and said that if you feel that strongly about it, just run for county council. And she did.
So it's your fault she's on county council?
I guess so.
All right, let me back up. You said that with regard to when you were on the Economic Development Board, how many years have you been in public service through the Economic Development Board, on the county council, and been actively involved in party politics?
A number of years. Up until the time I left county council, probably 16, 17 years. I served 10 years on the County Economic Development Board. So I was chairman of the Republican Party for 2 years. I was on the state executive committee of the Republican Party for 4 years. I served 4 years on the Brand 20 Water Conservation District Commission prior to being on county council.
And was there anything that would have prevented you from being reappointed to the Economic Development Board when you left office as a county council member?
No, there's not.
Is it a fair assessment to say that economic development was your thing on council?
Yes, it was.
Is it a fair thing to say that alternative fuel sources and energy sources were your thing as council member and an individual?
Yes, it was. And Anderson County actually at that time had a policy of trying, or a strategy of trying to build an alternative fuels cluster. We had attracted the biofuels plant, we attracted the ethanol facility, and we were pursuing alternative energy as one of our economic development clusters.
As is the nation in general, right?
Yes.
And with regard to the Society of Automotive Engineers conference that you went to in Detroit, what was the purpose of your going to that conference?
It's more than a conference, it's really a trade show. All of the Tier 1, Tier 2 suppliers and the OEM manufacturers, the actual automakers, have a presence there. If a lot of counties and states, Texas was there, Tennessee was there, Dorchester County was there, Aiken County was there, they have a presence at this because it's the communities that want automotive industry or manufacturers in their community go to SAE because that's where you find the companies that are going to be automobile suppliers.
And is it a fair assessment that South Carolina and the counties therein are pursuing automotive industry?
Yes, particularly the upstate. The tech school system had a presence there. The State Department of Commerce from South Carolina had their own booth.
And during the period of time that you traveled to these conferences, was Ms. Plummer on the Economic Development Board?
Yes.
Have you ever had your travel questioned when you traveled with a male?
No.
If you were still on county council today, would you still be actively advocating for that intermodal facility that you were describing?
Yes, I would.
Tell me let me ask you a second question I asked you before we go there. Had you been appointed to the Economic Development Board after your term on council, would you be actively advocating for that intermodal facility?
Yes, I would. It's good for Anderson County.
Tell me what an intermodal facility is and why it's good for Anderson County.
An intermodal facility is it's a rail yard essentially, but it has cranes where they take the containers off of the railroad cars, the well cars, and put them on train chassis for delivery to their destination, or they receive the containers from a shipper and put them on the railroad. The communities that have intermodal facilities, their manufacturers have lower freight rates than the companies that are competing against us. And it's part of why companies, when they're looking at a community and deciding where to locate, they want to know what the freight costs are going to be. Anderson County historically has had the highest freight costs in the upstate compared to Greenville and Spartanburg, and it's been a disadvantage for us. It had with the intermodal facility in Greer, it's going to put Anderson County at a disadvantage. If it were here, which I think is a better location for us and for the railroads, it would be an advantage to Anderson County and our manufacturers.
And Mr. McAbee, your family had a trucking industry, which is no longer, right?
That's correct.
And so you grew up with this transportation kind of climate in your household, didn't you?
Yes, I did. My whole life I drove a truck.
And when Ms. Perrin asked you about these trips that you took that didn't result in any tangible economic development as of the time you left council, would it be a fair statement to say that economic development is like planting seeds?
It is.
Does it sometimes take a long time to grow?
It does. The initial contact is not going to result in an announcement. You have to repeatedly go back, talk to the same people, look for when they're interested in expanding, and seek that opportunity to sell them on Anderson County, or your community, whoever your community is.
Do you believe it was useful for the people at the SAE trade show to see the same faces over and over again?
It is.
Do you believe, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That type of continuity, whether you're selling a product or whether you're promoting your community, helps reassure them in the stability that you can offer.
Are you aware of how many trips the economic development director in Greenville or Spartanburg took over the 2 years to get economic development?
No.
Do you think the number of trips that you took on behalf of Anderson County for economic development purposes was unreasonable?
No.
Did the trips that you took as a council member on behalf of economic development, did that in any way influence how you voted on Mr. Preston severance?
No.
Did you make other council members aware of your economic development activities?
Yes, I did. Specifically, I spoke with Larry Greer about it regularly, and Mr. Wilson and Ms. Floyd.
Mr. Greer very knowledgeable about the budget of Anderson County?
He's the best there's ever been.
So, finances are something he watched?
Exactly. He was always who I went to if I had a question about the budget.
Would you deem yourself a fiscal conservative?
Yes, I am. I've always considered myself a fiscal conservative. That's why I got involved in Republican Party politics.
Are you a Republican today?
Yes, I am.
And does your wife still serve on the executive committee of the state Republican Party?
Well, actually, she's on the executive committee of the Anderson County Republican Party. She was on the state committee of the state executive committee and is past president of the South Carolina Federation of Republican Women.
I want to move back to a question that Ms. Karen asked you with regard to Exhibit 72 and 73. I think Ms. Karen may have intimated that Ms. Plummer's registration was paid for by the county. Do you have those exhibits in front of you?
I do.
All right. Now, on Exhibit 72, it appears to me that the standard rate for the Rail Trans Conference in 2008 was $1,095 if the registration occurred after August 30th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Move over to Exhibit 73 for me, if you would. And I think that there was a check cut in the amount of $2,606.90. Did you see that expense report? It's Exhibit 73.
Yes.
And how many registrations do you see on that expense report?
One.
And that was your registration, right?
That's correct.
So when you testified, you did not think that Anderson County paid for Ms. Plummer's trip that time. You were correct, weren't you?
I believe so, yes.
Now, I think Ms. Karam asked you about whether you had ever read Mr. Preston's contract, employment contract with the county.
Right.
And I believe you testified you had not. Were you generally familiar through council meetings and advice from attorneys as to what reasons Mr. Preston could be terminated for cause for?
Yes, I was. In fact, I'd had discussions with council members, with the county attorney. In fact, I think I first learned of what was required for cause from Ms. Wilson when she said she was looking for something that would to terminate him on. And that was that's conviction of a crime to financial advantage, a conviction of a crime of moral turpitude, or abandoning his job, not doing his duty.
And those duties are the duties as defined by the Home Rule Act, right?
Yes.
Were you aware at the time in November of 2008 of any conviction that Mr. Preston had at all?
No.
And there were no convictions, let alone of moral turpitude or a crime for personal gain, were there?
No.
And had Mr. Preston ever refused to perform the duties to the majority of council, the council in 2008, as of November of 2008?
No. It's not really a question of the majority, it's a question of the council as a body. A majority voting in the council constitutes the council. The body, as a body politic, constitutes the will of the council.
And had the body politic, as of November of 2008, ever voted in a session that Mr. Preston had not performed the duties as outlined in the Home Rule Act?
No.
And based upon that, did you receive a memo from Mr. Bright that's been identified as Defendant's Exhibit 28 as a member of the personnel committee?
Yes, I did.
And did that memorandum also lay out options that the personnel committee could have entertained?
Yes.
And was one of those options to buy out Mr. Preston?
Yes, it was.
And was one of those options not to buy out Mr. Preston?
Yes, it was.
And did you listen to the advice and consider it carefully when Mr. Bright gave you all what your options were?
Yes, I did.
And when you took that into consideration, was it a deliberative process?
Yes, it was.
Did you have a deliberative process as part of the personnel committee meeting with your co-members, Mr. Greer and Mr. Wilson?
Well, yes, we discussed it.
Do you recall what the initial demand was from our camp to settle this matter?
I think it was something like $1.75 million.
And
1.75.
And you recall that it was actually negotiated down to the 1.14 million.
Yes, it was. Between council, Mr. Bright,
My co-counsel, Mr. Hoskins.
Mr. Hoskins.
And did you weigh the advice that you received from Mr. Bright that after his attorney's fees and the potential that you have to pay Mr. Preston the severance and other damages, that it could exceed $2 million?
Yes, I did.
And when Ms. Parham asked you about paying for tort claims of people who are not on council yet, were you aware that Mr. Preston had current pending litigation against Ms. Wilson and Mr. Waldrop?
Yes, I was. I was well aware of it.
And in fact, on August 11th of 2008, with Plaintiff's Exhibit 78, Mr. Preston actually notified you and all the other members of council that he was forced to bring suit against Ms. Wilson and Mr. Waldrop, right?
That's correct, for interfering with his abilities to perform his duties.
And you received a copy of that memorandum?
Yes, I did. And he informed us that he was going to move forward with seeking an injunction.
I'm sorry, say that again?
He said he informed us that he was going to move forward then with seeking an injunction.
And he did that, didn't he?
He did.
And prior to the severance vote on the night of November 18th of 2008, they had a temporary restraining order hearing prior to that, hadn't they?
They had.
And you all had a meeting of the Personnel Committee on October 27th of 2008 and November 4th of 2008, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the one that was held at the Powdersville Library and Government Center, the one on October 27th, is the Powdersville Library and Government Center in Anderson County?
Yes, it is.
And approximately how far is that building from Mr. Wilson's office at that time?
It was very close to his office, so within a couple of blocks, I would say, or half a mile. It wasn't far from my home. It was as close to my house as Anderson is.
And you live over off of Highway 178?
Yes.
And was Mr. Bright intended to come to this meeting on October 27th?
Yes, he was.
And was it reasonable for you all to travel to the northern part of this county and save Mr. Bright having to travel and charge the county by the hour?
Exactly. It saved the county money, us meeting him there.
Now, the second meeting that y'all had on November 4th, you actually had across the street at the historic courthouse, right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Bright traveled for that meeting as well.
Yes.
And you were at